Hey, it's Isaac. Now that we're in spring and summer is around the corner, temperatures will continue to rise. You might notice that your PC might be getting a little more toasty than usual, and that's fine as long as it's within safe limits, but I like to keep my components under a certain threshold if at all possible. Depending on what PC you have and what case you're using, you might want to consider installing more fans or some better quality fans in order to keep up with the changing climate. Let me show you how that's done. Alright, so before you start, you are going to need a Phillips head screwdriver to get your fans on and off of the case. And make sure that your computer is completely cut off from power before you do this. For this case, I'm only going to need access to the main chamber, so I'm going to lay it down and start taking off this acrylic side panel. Now, those of you with eagle eyes might notice that this is actually not a complete system. I'm actually waiting for the rest of my parts to come in for this new build that I'm doing for myself. So for now, all I have is this case, its pre-installed fan, and a placeholder motherboard that will not be in this system. Trust me, this is an old one. So here's the fan, and now we're going to follow its cable to the motherboard header where it's connected to, and we'll get it and unplug it. Now we're at the back of the case, and you'll notice that we have 4 individual screws that we're going to need to take out in order to take off the fan. I'm probably going to do this off camera because this is definitely a two-handed job. Alright, so with the cable disconnected and the screws off, we can easily just pull off this fan. It comes right off. So this is the pre-installed fan that was in the back of the case configured as an exhaust. I'm going to be replacing it with 2 120mm fans in the top as exhaust and one 140mm fan as an intake in the front. With this specific case, I will need to take off these magnetic dust filters to install any fans that I want in the top and in the front. You will probably need to do research about your specific case to see what types of fans it supports and how many of each fan and where. I know that this case supports a 120mm in the bottom, 2 140s or 2 120s in the front, and I believe 2 120s in the top and one 120 in the rear. Some fans may have an arrow along the sides or the edges that tell you what direction the airflow is in, but if it doesn't, the general rule of thumb is that the logo is where the air will come in. So this is going to be the intake side and this is the exhaust side. You can probably tell from the shape of the fans if you're paying close attention to that too. So here's my 140mm fan that I'm going to use in the front as an intake. So intake side is going against the edge of the case. I just need to put it in the front and align it with the screw holes, and that's a lot of holes. This is probably a bad case to use for an example of this, but it does have some markings on some of the holes to let you know which ones are the real ones that will line up correctly for a 140mm fan mount. One thing I forgot to mention is that these screws are actually self-tapping screws. So the fans themselves do not have any threadings for these screws to go into, so whenever you screw these in, they will make their own threadings and dig into the plastic. It might be a little bit tough at first, so you might want to screw these into the fans before putting them in the case so that the threadings exist and it's easier to screw them in. But I'm just going to brute force them in because why not? I ended up putting each screw in just a little bit so that it's still loose and I was able to line it up properly. Now I can tighten them all. And again, I'll do this off camera because it's better with 2 hands. Now I have all the screws in wrist tight and it is installed. Next, I'm going to use my 120mm fans as exhaust in the top. This is the intake side, this is the exhaust side. So the intake will be facing the inside of the case. And I found all the right ones. And that's not going anywhere, so that's installed. Before I install the last fan, I want to point out that this motherboard only has one system fan header right here. Normally that would be a problem because I have 3 fans that are going into one header, but I already knew that ahead of time. And these fans happen to have a splitter cable, one that goes into a header and one that is able to connect another fan to itself. This is really convenient because it allows me to daisy chain each fan to each other and then have the last fan connect to the header so that they're all connected to the motherboard. You can also buy these fan splitters, which you can use to have one header split into 2 fans. Before you go crazy buying all of these splitters though, keep in mind that you probably want to limit yourself to having 5 or maybe even 4 fans on one header at a time, or else you'll burn it out. So with all of that said, I'm just going to install the last fan now. Now that we have all of our fans installed, last thing to do is to get them wired up and plugged into the motherboard. My 140mm is going into the extender of the 120mm. Okay, now that's done. So this 120 is going into this 120. Now that's done, and lastly, this is going to go onto the motherboard header. Keep in mind that these connectors have little clips on one side of them, and that prevents you from plugging it in the wrong way because there's this little tab on the left side of this header. Now, our fans are all installed on the case and connected to the motherboard. Keep in mind that I'm not going to let all of these wires hang loose like this in the actual build. Once I have all the rest of the parts in, I'm going to be posting a full system build tutorial, as well as individual videos for how to install each component into a computer. Alright, now all that's left is to get our panel back in place, close it up, and then bring it back to my desk. Thanks for watching. Keep following Studio 128 and Wilcox Theater and Art for more content.